Now we're going to welcome Ms. Jackie Fu to introduce to us about interpreting here in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Yao and Janice for inviting me to come to this workshop. And just now, I followed with great interest the very informative presentation by Mr. Fei. Now, the UN has 193 member states. So from the UN, we zoom into Hong Kong, a tiny city in one of the member states. Our interpreting and translating service in comparison to the UN setup is actually a Lilliputian existence. So I've been asked to come here and give you an overview of our interpreting and translating service of the Hong Kong SAR government. And I will focus on simultaneous interpreting because that's what I do. So, can I just use this? Well, I could Sorry. Now, first I will give you some background about how the SI service came into existence in Hong Kong. And then I'll, of course, also, so I'll give you some information about the historical background. Sorry. And about our language policy here in Hong Kong and also the support service we have for languages. And then I will focus on the work of the simultaneous interpreters here, how we recruit people, how we do training and development, and then finally I will wrap up with a few words on professional ethics, which is actually the core values of our service. Now, on the historical background, before 1974, English was the only working language of the Hong Kong government then. All the government documents, notices, correspondence, and even the laws were in English only. And English was also the only language spoken in at official meetings and functions. But then, you know, of course, Hong Kong is predominantly a Chinese community. Most in the community are Chinese people and they speak Chinese only. So that's why at the time, if there was a need to issue certain documents or correspondence in Chinese, in the government there was a team that did the work, and they very aptly named Chinese language officers. So they would translate these documents from English into Chinese. And also the Chinese language officers or CLOs would also provide consecutive and whispering interpretation at government meetings or interviews when there's a need. And then in the early 1970s, the Hong Kong government wanted to promote popular participation in public affairs and also to enhance the transparency of its work. So it's definitely not going to happen if it just used English, given the population was mostly Chinese. So therefore, they eventually passed a law to declare both Chinese and English as the official languages. And that's the official languages ordinance. It was enacted in 1974. Since then, all important government documents and correspondence would have to be in both languages, and that all laws must be enacted in both English and Chinese. And that's also when the migrate, the Chinese interpreter grade came into the picture, because then at meetings, the government would have appointed members from, say, a certain sector or a profession, and then people, these members may not speak English, although the meetings were conducted in English, so they would need a simultaneous interpretation to bridge the communication gap. Now, the reason why the CLOs were not asked to take up the SI duties as well is because they had already reached capacity in terms of their workload. So it was thought at the time it was more desirable to set up a separate unit just to provide SI service. So in this sense, our practice is not quite like the usual international practice, where conference interpreters would work both in the simultaneous and consecutive mode. So in Hong Kong, in the government, we have separate streams for SI, and then the CLO colleagues who do translation will also take up consecutive or whispering duties. And then upon the reunification of Hong Kong with the mainland, the official status of English and Chinese was further enshrined in the basic law, which is our mini constitution. And keep going. So as a result of this very, certain declaration of Chinese and English as the official languages, the Hong Kong SR government formulated a language policy on that basis. First is policy of biliteracy. That means we will actually promote the use of both Chinese and English in the conduct of government business, because these are the official languages. And then you might have noticed in the last slide that with the ordinance or the basic law, there's reference only to the Chinese and English languages. And that's usually construed to mean the written languages. So what about the spoken languages? Do we have a policy in the government on spoken languages as well? Well, Hong Kong is a city in the Guangdong province. Over 96% of the population speaks the Cantonese dialect, and then Hong Kong is a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China, and Putonghua is the official language of our country. Then Hong Kong is also a cosmopolitan city where we have a large expatriate community. English is widely spoken by expatriates and in the business setting and other settings. So apart from biliteracy, our government also embraces trilingualism in its language policy. And the objective of the policy of biliteracy and trilingualism within the civil service and also in our school and education system is that civil servants and locally educated residents are to be equipped with the skills to communicate effectively in written and English and Chinese, and also spoken Cantonese, Putonghua, and English. Well, I dwelled quite a bit on the evolution of our government's language policy because I tried to set the stage for our division to come into the picture. Now, okay, so the government wants to train civil servants and students in Hong Kong to become biliterate and trilingual. But then the fact remains in the community there are many, like the expatriates who speak only English. And then we now have many mainland compatriots living and working in Hong Kong. They may speak only English or Putonghua, but probably not Cantonese. And at the same time, there are the older generation or the less educated who may speak only Cantonese. So they should not be barred from, gaining access to government information or participating in government affairs just because they don't speak the right language. And that's why we have the official languages division. Now, this division is under the Civil Service Bureau, which is the local equivalent of a ministry on the civil service matters. And the OLD, the Official Languages Division, has two streams: the Official Languages Officer grade (OLO) and the Simultaneous Interpreter grade (SI). If you might remember just now, I mentioned the Chinese language officers. So after the declaration of English and Chinese as the official languages, the Chinese language officer grade was renamed as the Official Languages Officer grade to now show the status of our recognition of both Chinese and English. So how do these two grades support the language policy of the government, and how do we help the public to have access to government information or to take part in government affairs without by removing the language barrier? And perhaps before I go to that, we can take a look at this interesting fact you might not want to know. You can see the OLO grade is way bigger than the SI grade. There are some 500 OLO colleagues, but for my stream, the SI stream, there are just 14 of us in total. Perhaps by looking at the size of the establishments here, it gives you an idea of the difference in workload between the two streams. And also probably it's because of the duties we take up is different. For example, for the OLO grade, well, their primary duty is translation service in Chinese and English. That's the written form of the languages. And as I mentioned, because the government wants the public to have access to important government policies and so on, so all important government documents must be published in both Chinese and English. If you follow, government affairs here, say the policy address, the budget, they are all in English and Chinese. And also, if the government wants to conduct public consultation on certain important issues, the consultation documents are always in English and Chinese. So, and this is the job of the OLO colleagues to make sure that they're both versions of these documents. And then for working documents of advisory boards and meetings, if there are members on the board who require documents to be in both languages, then again, there's a need to translate these documents to make sure that happens. Now, OLOs, they may work at the headquarters of the Official Languages Division to provide a central service to Policy Bureau or the equivalent of ministries. And then some OLOs are also posted to different departments to provide either translation and actually both translation and language support duties. In 2023, the OLO colleagues produced 8.5 million words of translation. And as I mentioned before, the predecessor of OLO, CLO, they also performed consecutive and whispering service. So this duty remains with the renamed OLO grade. So they're still doing that at certain meetings or interviews when there is need for consecutive or interpreting or whispering service, then the OLO colleagues will perform that. And then they also provide other language-related support services to different bureau and departments. They help to produce minutes or draft or vet documents to ensure correct language usage, and they also advise on the use of the official languages. In short, they are the go-to expert in the government on any language-related matters. Well, as for my grade, SI grade, we have a single function of providing simultaneous interpretation service in the three languages. Our workload ranges between 900 to 1,100 meetings a year. And the majority of the meetings are actually conducted in Cantonese, so we work 90% of the time into English. And we work in a biactive mode. That means we work either between Cantonese and English, Putonghua and English, or Cantonese and Putonghua. And if SI service is required in all three languages, then we will have to deploy 2 teams of interpreters working in 2 separate booths. Now these are the clients and events where there may be a need for SI service. First, the Legislative Council But this is our legislature that makes laws and approves government budget and spending and also examines government policies. So their work has a direct bearing on every aspect of society. And that's why they want to make sure there is transparency in the work. So all the plenary session and open meetings of committees of LegCo are webcast live in the 3 languages. And we provide SI service in Cantonese and English for the Legislative Council, or in short, LegCo. And then for the Putonghua service is actually arranged by LegCo on their own. And then there is also press conferences. This is an important form of functions that we provide service to, because press conferences are held by the government to keep the public informed of major policies, initiatives, or response to major incidents. And press conferences are again webcast live in the 3 languages to make sure the public has access to such information real time. And then we have another group of meetings: district councils, advisory committees, conferences, seminars, public consultations. SI service is provided on a need basis when there are certain members or participants in these meetings need the service. And finally, we have another group, the disciplinary hearings and commissions on inquiry. Disciplinary hearings are held by regulatory bodies of the various healthcare professionals in Hong Kong. They deal with allegations of misconduct of these professionals, such as doctors, nurses, dentists, and so on. And for the commissions of inquiry, well, they are formed rather infrequently, because they're only appointed to inquire into major incidents of immense public importance. The commissions are formed to establish the facts surrounding a certain incident, and then they will make recommendations on improving measures to prevent the recurrence of similar incidents. One example of such an inquiry was in 2012 about the tragic vessel collision incident that caused 39 deaths. The government decided to form a commission to inquire into the circumstances leading to the accident so that they could change the maritime rules and regulations to make sure this wouldn't happen again. But of course, after 2012, there were other commissions too. Say, I don't know if you follow the news, you might recall, say, the case of excess lead found in drinking water in certain public estates and so on. So again, the government wanted to form a commission to find out why this happened, and so it won't happen again in future estates. So for this kind of hearings, the proceedings are quasi-judicial in nature, and they are similar, or quite similar to court proceedings. SI service is required because there may be witnesses who don't speak English, and then most of the legal counsels are English speaking, so we are there to facilitate the giving of evidence by witnesses. So you can see we provide SI service to a myriad of different government meetings and functions. The purpose is to make sure that language barrier would not stand in the way of someone who wants to either participate in public affairs or have access to government information or want to be given a fair hearing. Well, as you heard, we are tiny, tiny grade with 14 in the grade. So for obvious reason, our grade structure is rather flat, just the simultaneous interpreter rank and then the chief simultaneous interpreter rank. Well, with only 14 of us, we may not always be able to cope with all the service demands. That's why we have a pool of part-time simultaneous interpreters to come to our rescue on the busy days, and they are paid by the job. The career path for full-time interpreters. First, how do they join us? They join us through either open recruitment or in-service appointment. I will talk about that a bit more later. And then if they are appointed, then they become simultaneous interpreters. And to be promoted, there is the promotion rank of the CSI, as you saw just now. Now, of course, there is only open recruitment when we have vacancies. And similarly, there will only be promotion when there are vacancies in the CSI rank. On the entry requirements to become a simultaneous interpreter with the government, for A to C, these are job-specific requirements. The minimum requirement is a bachelor degree, and then a full proficiency in, well, actually we're talking about Cantonese, English, and preferably Putonghua. I'll explain later why Putonghua is only a preference. And then from D to E, these are the from D, F and G, these are the service-wide requirements. That means you want to become a civil servant, you have to be a permanent resident. And then for our particular rank, you have to have a level 2 pass in the common recruitment exam for civil servants in English and Chinese. That's the equivalent of IELTS 6.8. But actually, if it's about our job of doing SI, 6.8 is rather not enough. But this is the service-wide requirement, and it's linked to our rank in the civil service. And then, of course, now everyone has to pass the basic or national security law test. As for E, that is the 7 years qualification experience. Again, it is more a civil service requirement linked to the starting salary of a particular rank. So for all ranks with the same starting salary, there is this requirement of 7 years service. But then for part-time SIs, if they want to apply for our job, E and G do not apply to them. That means that if you are fresh graduate and you pass our test, you could become our part-time interpreter. Now, so what do we test, in our recruitment? There are 3 phases in the test. The first phase, phase 1, is at-site interpretation aided of text. Now, if candidates meet the entry requirements, then they are invited to take this phase 1 test. And they are given a passage in Chinese and a passage in English to read. And then there will be audio recordings of the passages, and candidates will then render interpretation in English and Cantonese accordingly. This phase of the test is to screen in candidates who possess the high level of language proficiency and comprehension skills that we require to do the SI job. So definitely we're looking for much higher than an IELTS 6.8 proficiency level. And then if candidates pass the phase 1 test, then they will be invited to come back for the phase 2 test in about a month's time. And before they take the test, we will actually give them a briefing and also a practice session to help them prepare better for this phase of the test. And there are 3 parts in this phase of the test. Part 1 is SI of ad-lib discussions, and Part 2 SI of scripted speeches. In both cases, both parts of the format is the same. We play video recordings in Cantonese and English, and then candidates will render the interpretation in English and Cantonese accordingly. Now, the reason why we have scripted speeches, because interpreting for scripted speeches without sight to the text is actually more challenging than interpreting ad-lib discussions. So in part 2, we want to raise the bar for candidates. Candidates must first pass part 1 of the test, and then before they can move on to part 2 of the test. And if they pass part 2 of the test again, then they will go to part 3 of the test, which is speech making. So we give specific topics to candidates and ask them to prepare a speech one in English and the other in Cantonese. This is the final test to gauge further candidates' linguistic and analytical skills, as demonstrated by their ability to present their views and arguments coherently and eloquently in both languages. So if candidates pass phase 2 of the test, then there is still phase 3. It's far less taxing because it's just a selection interview. Well, the selection interview is actually a standard recruitment procedure for civil servants. Now you might recall our duties. We provide SI service in Cantonese, English, and Putonghua. So why is it that in the recruitment test we only test candidates on Cantonese and English but not Putonghua? Well, that's because, as I mentioned, we work between English and Cantonese 90% of the time. So we want to first find suitable candidates who could perform SI in English and Cantonese. And after they join us, we will give them training so they could eventually also work in Putonghua. And then we take advantage of the opportunity of the selection interview to have quick gauge of the Putonghua proficiency of candidates. But of course, the Putonghua ability is not a deciding factor for appointment. In the recruitment test, these are the qualities we want to gauge in candidates. Most important of all, of course, would be their linguistic strengths and their analytical power. Delivery is also important. We will screen out candidates who speak with a poor accent or who have bad speaking habits like stuttering, because it's very difficult to correct these issues in adults. So we don't want our new recruits to focus on this aspect of their performance when they have much to do already with further improving their linguistic skills, analytical powers, and so on. As for quick response, it is actually a demonstration of whether someone is quick-minded enough to adapt quickly to different booth circumstances. Unflappability. Well, if candidates are hopelessly jittery in the booth, to the extent that they're not able to deliver, perhaps they're not really cut out for the job of SI, which is never not stressful. Performance management. After new colleagues join us, well, the ordeal is not over even if they pass the recruitment test and are appointed, because then they will have to go through a probation period of either 3 years or 2 years. 3 years for those who are not civil servants and 2 years for those who are civil servants who are transferring from other grade to ours. And during this period, there will be a formal assessment of their performance every 6 months. And if they pass the probation or trial, then after that, there will be an annual assessment report on the performance. For part-time colleagues, if they are appointed, they are offered 2-year contracts, and renewal is subject to satisfactory performance as appraised as the end of the contract period. The whole purpose of the performance management regime is, of course, to ensure the quality of SI service that our grade provides. So we have stringent requirements on our interpreters. How do we help them to meet these requirements? For new recruits, they are coached on a one-on-one basis by the Chief Simultaneous Interpreters, CSIs. CSIs will partner with them in the booth and offer coaching advice afterwards. There are also individual training sessions or training classes for newcomers on specific aspects of SI skills, or to familiarize them with the different types of assignments that we work at. And to broaden the knowledge base of interpreters, they are encouraged to sign up for the many talks and seminars on a host of subjects that are offered by the Civil Service College, the training unit for civil servants. When I talked about the recruitment test just now, I briefly mentioned Putonghua training, and I promise I'll say a bit more on that. Before that, let's talk about interpreting first. Of course, interpreting is our bread and butter. So we do organize either local training courses or sometimes arrange overseas training for our colleagues when we identify suitable training programs. And coming back to Putonghua, after new colleagues join us, they are given local Putonghua punctuation after they are confirmed to the permanent post. And then they will also arrange immersion courses on the mainland for those who are not yet proficient enough to perform Putonghua SI. Now, Putonghua training is indeed a very important focus of our training and development effort, because, as I said, when we recruit interpreters, we don't ask them to be able to perform Putonghua SI, but then Putonghua SI is very much a part of our work. So we need to equip them with the necessary skills there so that they could eventually perform Putonghua SI duties. And also there are national studies programs for civil servants on the mainland, and so we also sign up our colleagues to join this program so they learn more about mainland, because when it comes to Putonghua SI duties, it usually has something to do with mainland affairs and development. Now, while we spare no effort in providing training to our officers, at the very core of our T&D strategy, it is all about self-directed enhancement. Interpreters need to constantly improve their working languages and interpreting skills. They need to keep broadening their knowledge base. Our T&D strategy is really just to support their efforts in enhancing all aspects of their professional skills and acquire the necessary knowledge, both general and professional knowledge. So the strategy is really to support lifelong learning, because after all, keep improving is the motto of the interpreting profession, if I may quote from IEC, the International Association of Conference Interpreters. Finally, on professional ethics. Now, because interpreters carry important responsibilities to speakers and listeners, so they must hold themselves to the highest standard of professional ethics. For our service, professional ethics are firstly about competence. We need to be sure that we are competent enough to deliver a quality service. That means we need to prepare thoroughly for assignments by reading documents, compiling glossaries, doing background research. And when we're not preparing for assignments, we should be engaging in active or self-directed enhancement to keep improving our language skills, SI skills, and broaden our knowledge base. Professional ethics is also about integrity, because we often work in internal or closed meetings involving confidential discussions of materials. So we're bound by the strictest secrecy, and we must keep to ourselves whatever we read or hear in the course of our work. Fidelity. We owe our loyalty to speakers. So when new colleagues join us, we will remind them that they must always strive to faithfully convey the messages of the speakers. They must not distort the meanings of speakers simply to suit their own political or religious conviction. So that's all I'd like to share with you on the work of the Simultaneous Interpreters of the HKSAR government. In conclusion, the SI grade plays a crucial role in supporting the implementation of the government language policy of trilingualism. The provision of SI service in Cantonese, English, and Putonghua is one of the means of the government to ensure that members of the public will not be denied participation in government affairs or access to government information due to a language barrier. Thank you. 谢谢，多谢。In line with the policy of trilingualism.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fu. We really appreciate your unique perspective and also helping us to understand more about how translation and interpreting work in the HKSAR government, and more importantly, how important our work as translators and interpreters, in particular interpreters, are. Thank you very much.